When I first say, like, my dad, whenever racism happens to me, he just tells me, "Shut up and eat a humble pie."
Yeah.
So the audience first reaction would be like, "This dad just doesn't have, a spine. He's just like, he just wants his son to just subdue to this." But then once I take them through some stories of my dad's growing up, or some of the context he came around, the culture that he was around, people will be like, "Oh, I actually relate to him as well in some way." So I think just exposure in the most basic sense can help us sort of appreciate each other's cultures.
Good afternoon and hello. My name is Nyoxani. Most of you guys know me as Shani, and I'll be your host today. And I am accompanied by two amazing guests, Simba and Ram, who will in a bit introduce themselves as they have a lot of stories and experiences to share too, the topic of today. And about myself, I am a philosophy, politics, and economics student at the VU, and was invited to host this podcast by We the People. At this point, thanks a lot and shout out to We the People for granting us this amazing opportunity. And today we're going to dive into a very interesting topic, I believe, namely the topic of culture clashes. When cultures meet and experience friction. And our guests have a lot of life experience and perspectives and opinions that I'm very much looking forward to explore together with you guys. And without further ado, maybe introduce yourselves, maybe share some of your stories. Let's start with Ram, the comedian, the traveling comedian, as we know.
Awesome. Yeah, my name is Ram. I'm originally from India, but like a traveling comedian, I was first always been a traveler. So I lived around 5 different countries. I grew up in India, then I lived in the US for a little bit, then moved to Italy in the middle, then lived in Spain, and now I live in the Netherlands. So I can't really say I'm belonging to one particular culture, so very multicultural in my background. Right now, for the last couple of years, I've been a stand up comedian in Amsterdam, but pretty much every month I'm traveling around Europe, making the most out of my Schengen visa, trying to trying to do comedy everywhere.
Yes. Is it before you lose it?
Exactly. 5 more years. So let's hope. I make the most of it. Yeah.
My name is Simba. The name has nothing to do with the Lion King. It's actually from Zimbabwe, where it means strength. That's where my mother is from. My father is from the Netherlands. I lived in both countries, although I also lived a long time in South Africa. Just like Nyoxani, I did philosophy, politics, and economics, although I already finished that.
I'm still on it.
And right now I'm working at an NGO that's basically focused on building health systems in African countries. And on the side, I also run a small YouTube channel called My Take, where I talk about geopolitical issues.
Yeah. Lovely, awesome. Lovely. Yeah, now hearing the story behind your name, that explains your physique, my man. Nice. Lovely. So, what inspired me to do this this podcast was I was sitting on the Amsterdam metro, and I was observing a situation. There were like, I think 3 or 4 young black men, and they were like talking and having fun, and they were talking loud. But next to them, there was like an old Dutch couple, really uncomfortable. Like a white Dutch couple where you could see like, oh, there's something happening here. There's friction, Right. And I was like, so what is happening here? Because both are acting out of a place of like what they're familiar with, like their default mode of like habits, ideas, and costumes and norms and expectations of how people behave. So I found it interesting to explore. Okay, there's something happening here, the friction. And it reminded me of a Mozambican friend of mine who once said, hey, German buses, it's like depression. Yeah. Nobody is speaking. And he said like, in Mozambique, everybody's just like hitting the walls when the joke is good. It's like, and people are just talking to strangers, whereas like in Germany, like, of course, not always, right? But when you enter the bus, it's expected for you to like, be collected. Yeah. And so I started thinking about culture clashes, and culture is a big word. I even googled it before the show to see like, okay, like what framework are we using?
Yeah.
And mostly it's like, I don't know, like the norms, ideas, habits, and expectations of a group of people, which means, you know, you can have different cultures obviously within countries and cultures, so to say. So I thought I want to hear of people who've definitely experienced, you know, some culture clashes and maybe see, yeah, what personal anecdotes you maybe have or how you incorporate that in your work life or
Yeah.
experience life or private life. And yeah, start with the Schengen visa race.
Yeah, and yeah, I would say culture clashes are one of the main reasons or fuel for me to even get into stand-up comedy, because I've lived since I was like a teenager. I've lived mostly outside of India. That means like when you're young and you don't really have the maturity, you're sort of subjected to a lot of cultural differences. But when I sort of grew into myself, I don't know if I'm old enough yet, but I'm 24 right now,
Yeah.
and I felt somewhere around 22 was when I started to feel like I got a grasp of what was happening around me in
Yeah.
terms of different cultures and how they come together. Sometimes they mismatch, sometimes they match.
Yeah.
And sometimes it goes to the other direction where it could be you face like a racist incident or
Yeah.
things like that. And right before the pandemic was when I had the tipping point of the culture clashes just surrounding me so much. And it was so evident in every walk of my life that I had to talk about it. I didn't have a choice.
It's like, hey, I have to bring this to the
Yeah.
world.
And the only sort of platform or the tool that I could use was stand up, because that's the only thing I've known all my life, which was sort of giving me joy, giving me happiness. And I thought, is there a way I can connect what I'm learning from these cultural differences or what I'm being subjected to, and sort of use stand up as my stage to actually
Yeah.
talk about these things. So I definitely understand. And just to start off with one example from my end, like one question I always get when I go in like a social setting, especially in Europe, and I'm like holding a glass of water, people are always like, "Oh, you don't drink because you are." They don't even know the religion, so they say like the language name. They say like you're Hindi, right? And then I have to explain them Hindi is not a religion, it's a language. And then they're like, oh, so you're Hindu, right? And I'm like, and I have to explain to them I'm an atheist. I don't
Yeah.
believe in God. Then they're just like, how could this even happen? Like, if you don't believe in God, like why are you not drinking? Did you ever have a problem with drinking? And I'm like,
That's great.
Alcoholic.
Who are the people who ask though? Because I feel like that also shows about their
Yeah.
culture, how direct
Yeah.
you can ask.
Yeah,
them.
it's
Have
a lot
you
of
ever had
Germans, a lot of
Okay.
Dutch people.
Of course.
Yeah.
Of course.
Yeah, and yeah, they're shocked that I've always been sober in my life. I've never touched alcohol, just
as a
because.
comedian?
Yeah, even as a
Yeah,
comedian, which
yeah.
makes it even crazy. So, and the reason being is that in my culture, where I come from a small town in South India,
Yeah.
drinking is not really part of our social setting.
Yeah.
And even though I've transported across the world, I've always been, at the end of the day, I'm still myself. I'm
Yeah,
still the
yeah.
kid from that town. I still have similar values to what I was growing up with. So drinking is just not one of them. And it's hard to explain to people that
Yeah.
it's just
It's
it's
just
not
not-
part of my culture, but
Yeah.
people just think like, oh, there must be something else, you know. So yeah, culture clashes is definitely, yeah. Maybe I also need to thank them in a way, because I have a stand-up comedy career now where I get to talk about these things and sort of look at some of the bias that I have, what people have, and yeah, definitely culture clashes. I think, yeah, it's sort of part of my life, and I try to use my work to sort of bring that out.
So, but like
Yeah.
one question when you say like you use your work to bring it out,
Yeah.
is it like, do you feel the need to just voice what you're observing, or because you said like, okay, you want to share what you've learned, or is it like
Yes.
you want to critique society, or do you want to critique some practices, like what's happening there? Do you want to point out the clash,
Yeah.
like, hey, look, there's an accident happening here, or
For me, it's more about different comics use like different styles. For me, I like pointing it out. I don't necessarily want to tell people this is the way you need to solve it, or this is the way you have to deal with. I don't want to police them in like this is what's the right thing to do, but I want to point out like how ridiculous it is. You don't see the basic difference, that it's just people from different cultures approaching it in a different way. But sometimes you just assume all these things around that you don't really get to the heart of it. Yeah.
Okay. sometimes you assume all the things around that you don't really get to the heart of it.
Yeah,
You mean like of the culture?
of the culture,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah,
okay, okay.
yeah,
No, and that's this is
yeah,
what we mentioned
yeah,
earlier, is that like it's comedy, but at some point it's like so deep, you could say, or like
yeah,
so, yeah, underlying societal critique.
yeah.
But
But
yeah.
I must add here though, I don't know if you guys watched it yet. One of the greatest comedians of all time,
Yeah.
Norm Macdonald.
What?
Norm Macdonald.
Norm?
Yeah, Norm.
Like
And people
okay.
just call me Norm. We call him Norm.
Yeah.
And not me. I'm nowhere close.
You
It's
aspire
very
to be
different.
him.
I don't think I can aspire. He's just beyond greatness.
Okay.
But he put out a comedy special that came out yesterday, actually, that it's kind of unique because he did it all on sort of like a self-recording
Mm.
by himself, because he died like a
Oh.
couple of months ago, and once he knew he was going under the surgery, like he decided, I'm just gonna use this as a last shot
Final shot.
to just record what material I've built, like the hour, and he just did it for himself. It's one of the funniest things you'll ever see.
He did it for himself.
For himself, there's no audience.
Wow.
Okay.
And then in that, one of the first jokes he does is like, comedians get called modern day philosophers. I think that's pretty insulting to modern day philosophers. Which I thought, because I saw we were just going in the direction.
Okay,
I have to acknowledge though that if
That-
you're a modern day philosopher, I have a lot of respect for
Okay.
you.
So all philosophers, you're not being attacked.
No,
There's a
exactly.
clear, distinct line between philosophers.
Because I might
and
be sitting
comedians.
beside two philosophers.
Ah.
You guys have
Well,
background in education, so
Ah,
I'm.
yeah.
Yeah.
We've read a bit, but
Yeah.
I'm not a philosopher. I'd aspire more to be a comedian if I could choose. I'm not, by the way. Yeah, yo, and Simba, what about you? What are your experiences with culture clashes? Because I mean, you've had, let's say, very different living environments, you know, with different like, surroundings that could, like, you know, put you in a situation with that. But also you have it on the digital world as well, you know, because like you're engaging with comments or with the on your YouTube channel, and like with responses and reactions to your videos. So I'm curious to hear what culture clashes have been presented in your life, or what they've done, or
Yeah, and indeed, I think my experience has been a little bit different from you, Ram. I guess because for me, I've sort of been, let's say, at the not on either one side of the culture clash, but sort of in the middle, on both sides, sort of looking in and looking out at the same time,
Wow, yeah.
sort of. So obviously, here in the Netherlands, you know, I am Dutch on my father's side, and I'm also Zimbabwean. So I kind of have this thing where most of the cultural norms of Dutch people are also normal to me, and but at the same time, not everyone always expects that of me.
that it's normal to you.
Yeah, because people
That's true.
might perceive you as, oh, you must be an immigrant, or you must be the child of an immigrant.
That's
or
very
whatever.
interesting. Yeah.
And so, in that sense, people, when I say certain things, or that I do certain things, or that I eat certain foods, or these kind of things,
Right.
people are surprised. They're like, "Oh,
Wait a
really?
second. Yes.
You eat stampot, or
Yeah,
you know,
yeah,
like these kind of things."
Yeah.
So, in that sense, you kind of see and navigate both
That's funny.
sides,
Yeah.
and then on the other side, also just within my own family, I guess you could say that there are sort of cultural. Maybe I don't want to call them clashes, but you see the differences in culture. You see, you know, my father's side, Dutch, super direct, straight to the point, and the Zimbabwean side is much more nuanced. We don't want to say no. We say sure.
Nice.
So yeah, so basically these kind of things, and sort of navigating, you know, basically both sides of different cultural divides, and yeah, both in the Netherlands, obviously here, but also, for instance, when I lived in South Africa for a very long time, because there, you know, it's quite this is a society that wants to put everyone into a box.
Right.
And I didn't quite fit into any of the boxes that are already established there, which was both a good and a bad feeling. Because it was good in the sense that I kind of felt almost above the fray, like that I didn't have to be part of these boxes, but it's also bad in that you don't really have any group or that you can really fall back on, in a sense. So in that sense, that was sort of my experience in life with culture clashes or navigating, you know, different cultures.
But don't you feel like that your position, being of mixed cultures, gives you like a superpower, so to say, in the sense, because like it gives you a bit of clarity in observing both systems operating, or both, let's say, norms, or both ways of behaving, and just you see how both sides are functioning. Would you say like that has played out to your advantage,
Yeah,
or has it like more made you more confused? Or
no, it's kind of one of these things. It's like, what is it? Not just best of both worlds, but like at home, everywhere, and nowhere type
Yeah,
of
Right.
thing.
Yeah.
That's one of these things that you kind of feel this almost privilege that, oh, I can navigate myself anywhere,
Pick
but
and choose. Yeah.
yeah, you can in some ways pick and choose, but also people tend to want to put you in a box
Right.
that you don't quite fit into because you are like you are both. So you're in the Netherlands, people tend to view you as, oh, you're immigrant or child of immigrant, but I'm not really that. So then it's different. And then in Zimbabwe, people say, oh, you're the Dutch guy. So it's like,
Yeah.
so in each side kind of wants to view you as the other because that's sort of what that's what they see as different about you.
I mean, being of a mixed culture myself, or mixed race, Mozambican German, I have a similar experience, and I have the feeling that it's like oftentimes you are wanted to be perceived as the other partially, or like because there is something other, but as soon as you do something that's good for the team, you're out, you're out. It's like, it's like,
Have you watched the racial draft?
no,
on the
not yet.
Chappelle
Oh
show?
yeah, race draft. Yeah, that
They're
one.
like Tiger Woods. He's one of us.
Obama,
Yeah,
the same thing.
yeah. I know what you mean. Yeah.
No, but I could really sympathize with what you said about Zimbabweans being indirect. I remember flying back to Mozambique after like having spent a long time in Germany, and just being in the operating system of a German person. Yeah, I call it operating system, right? Because I just arrive, and you arrive at the airport, right? And I wanted to pick up this like trolley where you put your luggage on.
Mm-hmm.
So there was a man watching the trolleys. That was his job, and this could go in a whole another direction, but I'll keep it short. And I asked the sir, like, "Excuse me, can I have the trolley?" And he looked at me and said, "Good afternoon. How are you?"
Oh yeah.
And I was like, "Eesh." Okay, that was a slight reminder of like, okay, like you have to adapt,
Right.
But it's always like, I think it's interesting when you have like, it's the individual, or let's say, because in this case I was you could say from his perspective, foreigner in the context of where the majority operates according to one culture.
Yeah.
But as soon as that is a bit more, it's not like, as soon as the power imbalance is not as big and you have actually like more of a group thing happening, it's like, what happens then,
Yeah.
And that's something I also find super interesting. But do you, Simba, did you have any experiences of culture clashes in the digital world, so to say, with your YouTube channels on geopolitics? Because I mean, like, politics is a heavy topic, no matter what culture you're from.
I mean,
It's like,
with YouTube, it's par for the core that you sometimes have crazy comments.
Yeah.
Although I will say most of the comments have been quite positive, but I think the main thing is that I do sometimes notice that even though I try to be, obviously I have my opinion, but I still try to be sort of balanced in terms of the perspectives of different countries or regions. But you do kind of catch yourself that, oh, this is actually kind of a very Western oriented stance. Or when you say we should do this or us, that without realizing it, I actually just mean, let's say, Europe or the West or this, but that's not voiced explicitly, but actually it is. And then sometimes you catch yourself, or someone in the comments might point out something like that, and you think, oh, that's actually right. That you don't always think about, let's say, the ingrained like biases in your own perspective that you might have when it comes to like who is we, or what what is important in the geopolitical world.
Do you sometimes have culture clashes within yourself? Like, because you say we, and like sometimes I'm like, I don't know which team to choose for, and I'm like, yeah, I'm talking on the European behalf now, but like, actually, no, this is the African in me. I'm like, so.
I wouldn't necessarily say in that sense, because in terms of the type of content I cover, I do actually have covered quite a few African topics, but of course, you also realize that the audience is mainly
Yeah.
Western more. So you kind of have to almost because
Cater.
of the market
Yeah.
forces
Yeah.
go a certain way to
Mhm.
some extent. So it's
Yeah.
more in that vein.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
Yes.
So speaking of audiences, we had the digital audience in Simba's case, but Ram,
Mhm.
you have to face the audience almost every night on
Every night,
stage.
yes. Yes, yes.
And have you had any culture clashes like facing the audience? I mean, like you've traveled to Berlin, Paris, UK, Spain,
Barcelona. Yeah, yeah.
the Netherlands, also maybe different parts of the Netherlands. Maybe Amsterdam is different than I don't know where you've been. Utrecht, Rotterdam.
Yeah. Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you have any experiences of culture clashes there, or
Definitely. I think people usually sometimes when I have a good show, like they come up to me and they ask me, they find out a little bit about me. The fact that every month I'm pretty much dividing my time between different cities in Europe and traveling around. The first thing they ask me is like, how are the audience in France, or how are the audience
Yeah.
in Germany? Do they laugh at the same things or things like that? And I've noticed that in a very subtle way actually in France, because I have some jokes where I'm talking about this. I think you guys were there when we did the storytelling night
Yeah.
at Mesrab, and I was talking about a story about me trying to go eat an apple pie,
yeah,
and then
it's a good story, by the way.
and then being asked to basically sign a waiver,
Yeah.
and no other person who was all white was asked to sign this waiver, like sort of put me in this place, and I had a similar experience in France as well
with the waiver.
with the waiver,
Yeah, okay,
with the
okay,
QR
okay, okay.
code.
Yeah, yeah.
Nobody was asked for the QR code. I was asked for the QR code, and I was just trying to adapt this story to that
Yeah.
and tell it in a French context. And I was trying to make fun of like French food.
Oh.
And
Ooh, don't do that.
and you can imagine. So I was talking about. I mean, the joke is not the not the most like unique observation.
Yeah.
It's just saying like I asked French people what kind of food should I eat, so I wanted to ask them like what kind of potatoes should I start consuming.
Yeah.
And just like that, it's
And
just a brown guy making fun of
of,
white people food, that they all eat potatoes. Like that's the joke. But then when I do it in the Netherlands, people love it. Like people
Yeah,
like especially when I do it in like Amsterdam, very international
Yeah.
places. Like sometimes even Eindhoven, where there's a lot of students,
Yeah, yeah.
Tilburg, they love this joke. Like when I say it in the joke format. But then I did the same joke in France. The first time I do it, like I don't get anything. It's just crickets, and then it just I could see it in their faces where they were just like, did he just do this to us?
No.
Like,
No.
and then the next
Oh.
time, because I am me, I'm like, this is my joke. It's like I've worked on it for so
Yeah,
long,
It's like your baby.
tested in different places. Exactly. And then I do it next night in a different place, and I still get crickets. So I was just like, okay, there's something going on here.
Yeah.
So I was just talking to the audience after the show, and one of the guys who was French, like he comes up to me and he's like talking about stuff. He seemed a bit not happy with the way I was talking. So I was like, what was wrong with my act? Like, what do you think? And he's like, yeah, you made fun of French food. Like, you don't take that lightly. I was like, okay. I thought his reaction was like, like I just disappointed him about his favorite politician or
Yeah.
sports person, but it was just food. Like,
Yeah.
and he just took it to heart. And yeah, we don't like that around here. I was like, okay, I will keep that in mind. But yeah, there's definitely, I would say, like based on the culture you're performing to, I would say you need to sort of keep that in mind. You can't just you could say the same thing, but I'm sure you can just adapt it to the setting. Yeah, definitely.
So what do you like take out of that for yourself of navigating culture clashes? Like, is there in the sense like a not a skill, but like a strategy or something or thought you developed? Because like I think you've been thrown in that situation of culture clashes more than enough in the sense
Yeah.
that like you how you handle those situations basically.
Honestly, I think the best way to approach for me, like when there's
Yeah.
culture clash and I want to navigate it, is to be honest with the crowd as to what I see it like.
Okay.
So if it's let's say like the French joke is not working, like French food joke,
Yeah.
and I address it
Yeah.
that here in France, like people don't like, and then people like kind of come on board that you see what they see as well. So sometimes when this clash happens, I think the best way is to sort of address it head on, and
Okay.
people will sort of come in your group, or at least come on your side and be like, okay, I kind of relate with this guy. but it's also, I think it's important for people to not only understand the joke or the story that you're telling, but your perspective. If they see it from, it's kind of like the movie. Like if you watch a movie, you're looking at it from that movie standpoint. You're not comparing when you're watching a scene with some scene from different movies, right? You just watch it from the world. So I think if you transport the people to the world that you're in by taking them into your perspective, I think it makes navigating that culture clash a bit easier, or at least making it easier for people to see it.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
definitely. And so, Simba, like, you being the politician on the couch, not the politician, but let's say, like, most acquainted with politics, having the geopolitics channel, working for an NGO. Do you think that this idea, or like this concept that Ram just presented, is applicable on a policy level? Oof, I know. Actually, I should give you half an hour to write something. But I was just thinking, because it's like
Yes.
like this, what you just presented is such a good human approach, in the sense, like, because what I feel is at stake at culture clashes is that in the moment of friction, it's because people don't understand where they're coming from. Let's say, for
Yes.
example, the case where I was trying to pick up the trolley, right? The German would think, like, why is he wasting my time? Why do we need to have small talk how I'm doing? Like, this does not matter at all. And from his perspective, it's like, why are you disrespecting me? Why are you being so rude? Like, not acknowledging the human, and just like, instrumentalizing it. And so I was thinking, like, okay, like, and basically that's the same thing you're doing on stage, like you're sharing your perspective with the audience, like, hey, look, this is what I see, right? This
Exactly.
is where I come
This is
from.
how I see it. Yeah.
So I was thinking, like, so now, but like now you live in now we live in countries such as the Netherlands, and cities like Amsterdam, where there's so many cultures, just like meeting, And I was like, do you have any thoughts on top of your head? I know this is a a $1 billion question, but like, if you have any thoughts where you could say, like, oh, this is actually something that could be addressed through, let's say, I don't know, policies or politics or whatever, or maybe we need to create a whole new culture. I don't know, like.
I mean, in terms of politics, I don't know, because I'm not sure that these kind of things are always best addressed by politics.
Okay.
Because politics obviously has its own incentives, and I think the incentive of politics is to play into whatever gut feeling we have.
Right. To play into.
Yeah, to play into whatever gut feeling we have.
When you say we, in this case, you're referring to
voters.
Yeah.
Everyone.
Okay.
Yeah, voters. So that could be the people who feel that their culture is under threat.
Yeah.
But also the people who feel like, oh, everyone should just be multicultural. So on either side, politicians, I think, have more of an incentive to just double down on whatever position they've established.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure that ideally maybe yes, but I'm not sure realistically that it's the domain of politics. I think it's more the domain of society itself and actors within society, like comedians, to do that.
Turns out comedians are not philosophers but politicians. Boom. Case closed.
Yeah, I do have 2 cents on this, which I think I've learned it in my life. Like, how can we bring sort of awareness or people together how to solve, let's say, culture clashes in a utopian world.
Okay.
But I would say more exposure to other cultures is a great starting point.
Like, so basically, we're just going to start a program and take all kids and drop them in like 5 different countries.
I'm not talking in the
just like your life.
No. I don't mean in like the bureaucratic or a political sense, but just on an individual level. Like, if you put yourself in front of other cultures, I think it gives you much more appreciation for their point of view. You may still disagree with it, but you will still be like, you can see the point. Like, that's something what I also do on the stage sometimes when I talk about like my Indian parents or their conservative beliefs. I kind of humanize them and talk about their perspective. And then sometimes audience, when I first say, like, my dad, whenever racism happens to me, he just tells me, shut up and eat a humble pie. So the audience first reaction would be like, this dad just doesn't have a spine. He's just like, he just wants his son to just subdue to this. But then once I take them through some stories of my dad's growing up or some of the context he came around, the culture that he was around, people will be like, oh, actually, relate to him as well in some way. So I think just exposure in the most basic sense can help us sort of appreciate each other's cultures.
No, but that's definitely true. I mean,
Yeah.
now the politics side is coming out, but
Yeah.
yeah, there's been a lot of studies on this that basically people who are more exposed to different kinds of people are also more tolerant and less opposed. And in the areas where people are most opposed to, immigrants or whatever, are also the areas that don't have them.
Yeah.
It's not in Amsterdam where this is happening. It's
No.
in places where people are less exposed to different kinds of people.
But on a globalized level, I ask myself, is exposure even avoidable? Like, can you even, like, I believe everybody should be exposed to
Yes.
as many cultures as possible.
Mhm.
But let's say for that hardlining person who just doesn't, like, who's just upfront racist and just wants to stick within their bubble. I'm like, I feel like you're playing a losing game. I see mixed reactions here.
I mean, it's a question of numbers, right? There's
Exactly.
nothing where you
Yeah.
can get everyone, but it's
Exactly.
like the attitudes of a society can shift radically. I mean, just think about in the States, let's say the attitude to interracial marriage.
Yeah.
Like 60 years ago, 90% against.
Exactly.
Today, maybe 10% against.
Yeah.
So you'll never get that 10%, but I mean, it makes a big difference whether it's 90 or 10.
Oh, definitely.
And
Definitely.
I'm also a kid that was actually, it's not part of a project, but I ended up being the first brown person in a town in Oklahoma.
Like the whole
I
time.
grew up. Yeah. So I can kind
Oh
of
my God.
understand what you were
Oh,
talking about, where
Oh.
like could exposure solve things, right? That's your question. I kind of feel like my like
sorry, that was
That's a lot.
intense, bro.
That's a lot.
The first one, the only one.
so
Oh shit!
it's
Oh
part
my
of my
God.
comedy act, like where I talk about like being the first brown guy. I just, of course, I fictionalize a little bit
Yeah.
because I mean I don't want to like throw people under the bus. Like
Yeah,
they're all human beings. I'm a human being, but I actually personally experienced it, like where the initial reception was obviously like. Now that Trump has won, like when are you going back to your own country? Hey, Muslim. I have seen these things. Like I got like kicked out of my bike. Like
Oh, shit.
few situations. Like that's why I do comedy. So I need an outlet to talk about these things.
Yeah.
But I'm not saying it's Stockholm syndrome. But with time, when people started seeing me for myself a little more, they started to sort of acknowledge me as a person and sort of realize that I'm more than just this brown guy that came to take away all their jobs. I mean, of course, there were other brown people with time in that town that I'm talking about, but the initial reaction was obviously like, "What is this new culture invading us?" kind of. But then I think with time, people start seeing me for who I am. Maybe they haven't fully transformed. They're hardline conservatives. They have their beliefs, but still, I think exposure is not a bad thing. And sure, like not every town you can plant an Indian guy to go and but yeah,
exposure strategy.
Yeah, and it's going to be traumatic for the guy for 5 years of his life until he gets on the stage. He can't really figure out how to talk about
That's
it.
like your new comedian school.
Yeah, exactly.
Social revolution and comedy in one. But like having touched on the topic of racism,
Yes.
what I was asking myself, is there a difference between culture clashes and racism in your opinion? Or like where are they connected and where are they distinct? Like
I think I have an interesting story on that one actually.
Shoot.
So back when I was a student, not
Back
that long
then.
ago,
That's like 1
3 days ago.
like 2 years ago, before Corona. But
Before Corona.
no, I had
PC.
a job at an agency where like a horeca job. We work in different bars, events, whatever. So we had one event where we had to actually work at farms because it was basically some sort of event related to Albert Heijn where people could come to the farm and taste the different goods. But
I
anyway,
see that on their advertisement. They always mention farms, So
but anyway, so I went with one colleague who was a Czech girl.
Okay.
And we went to this farm and we arrived early in the morning, and there was the grandma there. And the grandma was really annoyed by the fact that the Czech girl could not speak Dutch. But she was very open to me, the non-white guy, but who
Yes.
could speak Dutch.
Yes.
And then later on in the day, some Muslim people with hijabs also arrived there, and she saw them walking past the window, and she said, "Buitenlanders, foreigners."
But you,
Which I found
Yeah.
I found that very perplexing. That she kind of had different views. She felt different ways about different people. That for me, she didn't seem to have a problem with my race somehow because maybe she felt I was acculturated. Then the white girl who looks like her
Yeah.
but couldn't speak Dutch, she was annoyed by that. And then the
Yeah.
Muslim people look different and behave different. That was
on top
There's
of
a-
it.
that was even more.
There's a word for this. It's called model minority.
What?
A model minority.
Model minority.
So the kind of
okay.
minority you want.
Yeah,
The one that
basically.
can
So like there's some kind of nuance that I feel like,
Yeah.
depending on like the degree of cultural difference, people like become more or less opposed
That's a great
to
point.
certain people and certain groups. Because that's basically what I experience a lot. Because obviously I just speak Dutch and everything, and that's all normal to me. So people are less opposed. But someone who's clearly very very different, it's like,
But
who's
like,
this?
but like, she didn't know if they speak Dutch or not because they just walked by.
Well, no, she just assumed based on what they were wearing, which was
That they
the
wouldn't speak
headscarves.
Okay.
So like,
okay.
oh,
Yeah.
they're foreigners.
I actually I relate to this so much because I'm always for a lot of my white friends. You have to tell me from our colored perspective. For a lot of my white friends, I'm the good Indian friend.
In which sense the good Indian
because
friend?
I'm an Indian that has traveled around.
Wait, they literally
Like
say that to
you can feel the difference.
Okay.
Like I'm not talking just at work, but also outside when I have like my neighbors or the way they treat the other Indians who sort of in their Indian community, they speak more of their like mother tongue to each other, and then when they speak English, I'm not saying I do know I have an American accent for sure. I'm kidding. That was a joke. That was a joke. I do know I have an Indian accent, but I know mine is not as maybe thick as the others. And sometimes people come up to me, like people actually come up to me and be like, "Dude, I like the way you speak Indian accent." I'm like, what does that even mean? And then they start like being racist to the other Indian, being like, "Oh, when that guy speaks, I can't understand a word, but when you speak, I understand everything." And that's sort of a case of this where we're both Indians, but then they like me more just because maybe some of the thoughts I say are a bit Western, maybe not traditionally Indian, and they just think like, "Oh, this guy is a safe minority."
A safe minority.
Yeah, that's what I meant by model minority. It's the kind of brown that you want, he still has exposed.
Oh my God.
I have a big problem with that. Like when that happens, I of course spend an hour talking to them about what's appropriate or not. But the first time it happened to me, it blew my mind. First time I was like, "Oh, is that a compliment that he?" But wait, he's just bashing all brown people and using me to do that, and I was just like, okay, there is levels to this. Yeah.
Were the people aware of that when they were doing that to you?
They were not. Yeah, it's just an inherent reaction that came out, and sort of once I talked to them, they were like, "Oh, that's kind of racist." They learn. Yeah.
But no, it just makes me think, because if you look at a city like Amsterdam, which you could say people are more accepting or whatever, but even Amsterdam, you kind of see that not so much in terms of race, but you see that there's now very, very many foreigners, especially actually white foreigners from Europe who don't speak Dutch, who've been living here for years and probably won't learn Dutch anytime soon. And then you kind of wonder if you're...
I'm very close to that category.
You're one of them. No, but then I can understand that people say,
got it.
Okay, we can all speak English, sure, but shouldn't people start learning Dutch at some point?
Yes.
And then at that point, I wouldn't necessarily say that that's racism, that there's some sort of a line.
Definitely.
And it's sort of difficult. Where does that cross? Because I guess maybe people have some sort of expectation that if you come to a new place that you adapt in some ways. But of course, it's also a bit too far-fetched to say that people should change everything about themselves.
Oh, definitely. Touching on that, I found it scary how easy it is to not speak Dutch in the Netherlands. Like this was like out of all places I've traveled and lived in, I was like, you literally are not forced to make any effort to like integrate, which is like language wise, which is on the one hand it makes life for expats or people traveling or international students or whatever easier. On the other hand, it's like I was a bit concerned. I was like where's your language gonna go? It's like so it's a yeah, it's a weird one, I must say. Yeah, it's
Yeah, because I would argue that in some ways that it maybe even hinders the cultural exchange, because
Oh,
I feel like
definitely.
what it does, it kind of
Definitely.
creates bubbles. You know, you've got
Right.
all these Dutch people who just speak Dutch to each
That's-
other,
yeah.
and then these foreign people who are in this whole sort of international bubble speaking English. And it's kind of like, how do you solve that? Because you don't want to just say to everyone, "Hey, why don't you speak Dutch?"
Exactly.
But at the same time, you do want to create a bit of incentive.
But
So
you,
it's,
you don't need to say like, "Hey, why don't you speak Dutch?" It's like, "Hey, here's a free Dutch course."
I mean, of course,
that's how
Yeah.
but, you know, yeah.
Yeah.
No, definitely. What I thought about this, I think that in many cases, racism is a culture clash, but culture clashes aren't necessarily racist.
Sure.
So that you have like
Yeah.
situations where like it's like comparing an Android to iOS. Like it's just a different operating system, and people are talking past each other, like completely past each other. But in racism, there's always this bit of like it's a clash, but there's like one culture assuming superiority and
Exactly.
legitimate dominance over the other.
Yeah.
Which is like I think I don't know if that is like the dividing line, but it's like I think that's the buffer zone where you're like, okay, this is where they transgress.
And I think racism also has like consequences that can be real. Like
Yeah.
maybe culture clash, sometimes it could be sort of maybe more emotional difference that you feel, but racism sometimes, like let's say in that story that I was talking about, I had to sign a paper to be able to get the same result as other white people. So the racism, I think, in more ways than one, can materialize into actual consequences. Maybe you not getting an opportunity, maybe you being not able to get the same privilege as the other people. So it has a bit more of a consequence, I think.
I would partially agree and partially disagree in the sense that you don't get the same result through intention, so to say. Like there's somebody intentionally, or there's a system with intention that you don't get the same result.
Yeah.
But let's say I was just thinking, for example, there's many culture clashes where you really don't get the result just because you don't understand what is happening.
Yeah.
No, but no, I definitely.
In that sense, yeah, definitely makes sense.
I would say also one of the key, I think, differences with racism is that I think racism actually almost fails to take into account the cultural difference, because racism then says, I haven't even checked if you are culturally similar. You look like this, so no. Already. So racism actually already before the interaction even happens says no.
Just like
not you.
No, not even there is no culture. There's like no, like there's no. Okay. But like picking up on what you said, so you meant that basically in the case of racism you just get different outcomes.
No, I meant the outcome can get more affected by racism. Like for example, like if there's a culture clash, it may not materialize into actual real consequences, like where you have to do something extra because they're being racist, or let's say a cop is stopping you and asking you more questions compared to other people. I think that it just feels, it hits home a bit more in evident ways than I would say culture clash might be like more subtle. It might exist around, but racism, it's kind of like
no, that's very true.
Yeah, the proof is in the pudding, I guess.
The proof is in the
The
proof is in, I'll steal that one. No, that definitely hits home. The reason why I responded a bit nuanced was because I was just reflecting a situation where I was walking through one of the streets in Mozambique, and I was just walking, right, and all of a sudden this young woman called me like, hey, lança lá charme, não vais dizer nada. In the sense like, yo, hit on me, you're not gonna say anything? And I was like, so I've spent 10 years in Germany. Never on the public street has anybody said, hey, hit on me, right?
Yeah.
And
Is this a humble brag or is it a story?
no,
kidding.
no.
I'm kidding.
Oh, I'm sorry, man. Getting all
I'm
the
a
ladies
joker.
here.
I'm a clown. I'm sorry.
That was
I'm sorry.
wow, putting me on the spot like that. No, this was more in the sense because interesting that you perceived it that way, because what was happening in my head was like these like hitting on people on the streets in Europe is
No, no.
like that is a sin, and it's like justifiably so. Like, let's say we can have a whole discussion on that, but it's like there's rules and norms in place, to like enable everybody safety and a pleasant walk through the streets, right?
Yes.
So now coming out of this programming of being in Europe, where you respect each other's distance, and you don't expect to be, let's say, hit on by strangers in the public. It happens, but like you don't expect it, and it's not, let's say, looked upon in a good way.
Yeah.
I was just in shock that somebody would actually want this, that they were like brought up in a culture where they were taught to expect this behavior, or like maybe even request it. And but I was thinking, I was like, by not hitting on someone in that context, right? In that context, guys, I'm not saying you should do this in the Netherlands. Just make that clear. In that context, you would miss out through, let's say, the result in that situation of making that new contact. So like, basically tying it back to your initial.
Got it.
So I was like, oh wait, there's like not a two-way street. It's like a side path to that nuance.
Yeah, even with culture clash, I think, like you said, sometimes the outcomes may not be achieved, or the outcome might be different.
Definitely.
But I see that. Yeah. But racism, I meant more in terms of like those outcomes can be sort of negative.
Definitely.
For
and like crucial outcomes. Like
yeah,
those
exactly.
Are, like,
not getting a job.
Exactly. Like those are relevant outcomes where you're like it's.
Yeah, not being allowed to do something, or
not having apple pie.
Yeah. Yeah. And I also think like I don't know if you guys heard of this thing called caste system. Have you heard of?
We have.
Yeah. So yeah, basically like back in the day, like bunch of brown guys got together and they were like, if the British are oppressing us, like, can we do that to each other? Like,
that's how it happened.
Like, I'm just trying to make light of it. Yeah. But yeah, similar to racism, we have a Bollywood reboot that exists in India.
Bollywood reboot. What do you mean by that?
It's a reboot, so it's kind of similar in flavor, but even our own people like trying to still find some difference and start discriminating each other. Yeah.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
Okay. So.
But yeah, I was just wondering, like, do those things exist? Let's say in the Netherlands or Mozambique or Zimbabwe, like, sort of, do people have that kind of clashes? Like,
you mean within the culture,
within the country, within what you could call in a broad scope as, let's say, culture of Zimbabwe or culture of Mozambique?
Yeah, I think you could say so. I'd say in the Netherlands, there's just small things that I think you actually have in every country. Like you could say accent, not discrimination, but that certain accents, like from the north, basically from this part of the Netherlands, are viewed as more educated, better. Accents from the south are viewed as more backwards.
Really? Yeah.
Even though, of course, it shouldn't actually matter.
Yeah.
And then, I mean, in Zimbabwe, there's just different ethnic groups, I would say. So maybe I think because the majority language is Shona, so I think maybe there's more of an expectation that the Shona people are more surprised when other people are not able to speak Shona, even though, of course, there are parts of the country where that's not really spoken. So I would say in that sense, within South Africa. Within Zimbabwe.
Zimbabwe, yes.
That's a good question. In the German context, I don't think that there's that, let's say, intra-German discrimination, like when it's not, let's say, against people of migrational background, because that exists. So you have like racism and like discrimination, but like based on your accent, like people will make fun of it, but I don't think that you're not going to get checked by the cops, and you'll still get a job. Like people will look at you weird, but you'll still get a job. So that's for the German context. For the Mozambican context, having spent a lot of time in Europe, I can't really, let's say, speak for all of it. But what definitely exists is colorism. So the lighter you are, the more benefits you get.
Got it. Yes.
And that
it's the same back home.
So it's a horrible horrible leftover, let's say, of colonialism. And like, but like one moment where I realized this was, for example, like I was walking with my father, and we went into a steel shop just to get some steel stuff for a project he was working on. And the guy attending us, he came to me. So my dad is Muslim because my mom is German, with this, which is why I'm this mix.
Yes.
And he came to me and he's like, "Oh, what is it that you're buying?" I was like, "No, like he's buying." It's like I was like, "Oh, I thought he's working for you," and I was like, "Eesh." I was like, "It's my father," you know?
Yeah.
"Oh, it's your father." You know, and then they like he looked like in disbelief, you know, and I was like,
No.
"Yeah, okay." So like these, and it's like things like this that would happen in the store, you know. So I think maybe that's our version of the Indian caste system, you could
Yeah,
say.
yeah.
Like, but it's not that people got together.
No, even in India, they didn't.
I know.
British had a
Yeah,
hand to divide
yeah.
and conquer people as well, but yes.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah,
in
yeah.
that vein, there are also some interesting things in Zimbabwe as well, because obviously my father is the white one
Okay.
and my mother black one. So like, there's some. He actually plays with it a lot because in
Okay.
He
Zimbabwe,
plays like.
I mean, with those
Yeah.
differences, sort of that if you're white, it's not expected that you speak an African language.
Wow.
And
Yeah,
he doesn't really speak much, but like
Yeah.
whenever he gets stopped by the police, I mean,
Yeah.
everyone gets stopped by the police, in Zimbabwe, not because he's white,
Mhm.
but he will start speaking in Shona, and
They
that
just
totally
go-
disarms the police.
Right.
They start laughing. They're hilarious because for them it's like a unicorn.
Yeah.
You know,
That's
for them
funny.
it's totally
Yeah.
hilarious.
Yeah.
And then the other thing is, but I think that's worldwide, that if you're lighter, people think you have money, basically. So they just expect you to have money, and they try to get that from you.
Do you know Loiso Gola, the stand-up comedian from South Africa?
No.
He's South African, and he has a set where he talks about how he traveled to the U.S. and then like a white beggar came to him and asked for money, and he gave him money, and then the beggar was like, "Oh, thanks, man, thanks for helping me out. You know, where are you from?" And Luisa said like, "Yo, I'm African. I'm South African." Beggar looked at him like, "You take it."
Whoa.
So there's like in that vein where you were like, okay, people always assume that white people have money. Even the white beggars think they have more money than
That's just-
Africans, you know?
yeah.
So that was like, yeah, this amazing set. You need to check him out. But yeah,
Yeah.
that's amazing. Do you guys think there's something inherently comical about culture clashes or something comedic about it?
Yeah. No, I think it's funny. I think even in my own life, sometimes I try to play with it. Like sometimes people ask where you're from, and then I know the answer is not what neighborhood do I live in, right?
Right.
So sometimes I'll say, yeah, my father's from the Netherlands, and then I'll just stop and pause, and then
Like,
you can
yeah.
see them be like
They need
short
more.
circuiting.
Yeah.
They're like, wait, no,
Yeah.
and then I say, and my mother's from Zimbabwe, and they're like,
Ah.
heart attack
Yes.
avoided. So you sort of just you just try and play with it in these kind of ways that are just, amusing, and you try to, I guess, buck people's expectations.
That is
Yeah.
your job.
Yeah, exactly. And I love that he does that because that's pretty much how I got started into being funny.
Yeah.
Is because I have such diverse experiences in my life. So if I'm in a Spanish setting, like I lived in Spain for
Yeah.
2 years, so sometimes like people are talking in Spanish and I'm just like nonchalantly listening, and sometimes they talk about me, and then I join the conversation and they're just like, wait, what? All their wiring that's been built to them, it just short circuits, and they're just like, I have never seen a brown guy say these words. Like, what is going on? And I love doing that as well. So I do think it's there's something very inherently funny about, just because it comes from assumptions. A lot of it comes from assumption, and if you're busting the assumption, like, yeah, you can make some nice comedy out of it, definitely. Yeah.
Oh, that's lovely. That's
Yeah.
lovely. All right, I took a look in my question book, and there's not many questions left. But
Awesome.
do you have any thoughts, any questions, any ideas you still want to put in the sauce? I think we still have like 15 minutes, so yeah, depending on, or like, yeah, if you guys have anything you want to share, add, think about when we're on the topic. Awkward silence. Yeah, all right, perfect. Well, yeah, let me take a look. All right. So I was thinking, okay, we're gonna talk about culture clashes, and I have to like, have something like a concept that, that I can at the end, drop in that at least, gives people like some, not a framework, but like a souvenir or an idea.
Okay.
And have you guys ever heard of Hofstede?
No.
So there's this guy called Hofstede. I don't know if he's still alive, but he came up with this concept and says that there's you can divide, or no, you can analyze cultures through different lenses globally, and he came up with this framework that you can, let's say, there's cultures that are distinguished in uh, power distance. So
I think I've heard of this.
yeah,
I have
actually.
heard
Yeah,
of
yeah,
something.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, I just didn't pay attention
Oh,
before.
sorry.
No. In my econ class, but I remember
You remember
them
that?
talking about this. Yeah.
Yeah, so it was like that,
Yeah.
like basically how societies maybe expect, let's say, people of lower rank of power being able to do what
Yep.
they want or say something, or like how much they have a say, and let's say, for example, in traditional Southern Mozambican culture, what the dad says is law.
Yes.
I don't know how it's with the Dutch dad. But so yeah, so like he definitely has some nice frameworks where he touches on, let's say, masculinity, the expectation of genders, um, also on like long-term planning, that they apparently, he says that different cultures plan differently for long terms, and also uncertainty avoidance. So like how cultures are, let's say, open
Okay
to
with, yeah.
uncertainty. And he explores definitely a few more. So for those interested in looking into something like that, Hofstede is your guy, Geert.
Nice.
And but yeah, without further ado, I really enjoyed your insights. They were very insightful, fruitful. Like from comedic to politics to life experience to racism to being the only brown guy in Oklahoma. That really stuck with me, man. That really stuck with me.
Yes.
Yeah. So yeah, do you guys have any further thoughts on the topic? Otherwise, yeah.
I think we're good. I think we're good. Yeah.
So yeah, Simba and Ram, thanks for joining us,
Awesome.
and for everybody listening, thanks for listening. Thanks to We the People for making this possible. And next time you encounter a culture clash, I guess look for the funny stuff in it and create exposure. So yeah, thanks. All right, guys. Cheers.
All right.
Thank you guys.
Thanks.
Thank you.